Hi, I'm Bill Bradley. Join me for a recent excerpt of American Voices. When was the last time you felt joy? The kind of joy that makes you want to jump up and down. I'll give you a moment to think. Well, if you had trouble coming up with something, you'll want to hear my next guest, who's an expert on joy. And if you do experience joy, we'll talk about how you can find more of it. Ingrid Fetell Lee is a designer and writer, and she became fascinated with the concept of joy. She says she became the Nancy Drew of joy, trying to figure out what joy is and what makes us feel joyful. She's the author of the book, Joyful, The Surprising Power of Ordinary Things to Create Extraordinary Happiness. Ingrid's here with me now in the Sirius studios. Welcome to American Voices.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, the kind of joy that makes you want to jump up and down. What do you say to people who say, that just sounds like frivolous little things?
I think that is one of the problems in our society, is that we tend to focus a lot on happiness, on this idea of, the happily ever after, that we're going to get the promotion, we're going to find the right partner, we're going to buy the big house, and then everything's going to be great. And in the process, we overlook a lot of these little moments of joy. And in fact, we often postpone the things that are going to give us joy. So to work for that promotion, we skip out on spending time with our family and friends. We don't do our hobbies, the little things that bring us joy. We rush past something beautiful in our surroundings on the way to get to work to make those big things happen. And what often happens is we get there and we realize that we've achieved that thing, and then we go, what's next? Because we're looking for the next thing that's going to make us happy. When if we just took time to savor these little moments of joy, they actually start to add up to something much bigger.
Do you ever find people who don't feel joyful because they feel guilty or feel bad about the problems of the world, and that squeezes out their moments of joy?
It's certainly something that we're experiencing a lot right now. But I think what I've learned from my research is that actually joy can be a tool for resilience. Research shows that when for example, scientists have studied people going through tragic events in their lives, really difficult circumstances. And what they find is that when people make time for little moments of joy or positivity in those tragic events, they cope with those difficult events in a more adaptive way. They tend to rebound and discover more meaning and purpose in the event than if they had just sort of tried to plow through. So those little moments of joy can actually help us.
So, offices, homes, dorms, right? How do we find those little joy-inducing moments and places in our day-to-day life?
Okay, so this is what I think is really interesting. So we've all been taught that I think our surroundings are kind of a given, but joy isn't something we just have to find in the world around us. So we can actually use these principles, these ideas to make more of these moments for ourselves and for others. And so one of the sort of key drivers of joy that I found is bright color. And there's research that shows that people working in more colorful work environments are not only more joyful, but they're more alert, they're more confident and friendly than people working in drab spaces. So that's a really simple thing. Another thing also for work environments is bringing in a sense of abundance or texture to a space. Research has shown that people working in lean work environments, very minimalist and Spartan work environments, and then they take people and place them in environments that are enriched with artworks, with plants, with more sensory stimulation, that they're 15% more productive when they move into a more enriched workspace.
Really?
Yeah. So I think just paying attention to the quality of your surroundings and starting to infuse little touches that can start to lift your spirits and also possibly influence other aspects of your life, like your productivity or your creativity.
What's one of the most astonishing thing you've seen somebody do to generate joy?
In the world around them, I encountered the story of a mayor who was newly elected to be the mayor of the city of Tirana, Albania, back in the year 2000. And this was after 10 years of decline in the city of Tirana through organized crime and corruption. The city was so bankrupt that garbage just piled up uncollected in the streets. And When Eddie Rama was elected, he was actually a former basketball player like yourself and also a former artist. And he looked at his empty treasury and he found a little bit of money appropriated by the European Union for historic preservation. And he thought, I can work with this. And he took the money and he painted vibrant, loud, gaudy patterns on all the downtown buildings. And what he found right after he did this was that people stopped littering in the streets. And then the shopkeepers started to remove the metal grates from their storefront windows because they said that the streets felt safer, even though there were no more police on the streets than before. And then people started to pay their taxes, which is something they hadn't been willing to do before that.
All because he painted the buildings.
And it all started with the colors. And, that brought in some tax revenue. He was able to start collecting garbage. He was able to fix up the city parks and planted, 5,000 trees. And 5 years after this painting project began, the number of businesses in Tirana had tripled and the tax revenue had increased by a factor of 6.
Amazing.
And then 10 years later, it was at the top of the Lonely Planet's most desirable travel destination. So it had gone from being a place that no one wanted to be to a place that everyone wanted to be. And I think that what's interesting is now we're starting to see research that explains this. So there's research out of Vancouver, which shows that when people stand near a rainbow crosswalk, they are more likely to believe that if they dropped their wallet, it would be returned to them than if they stand next to a plain old regular crosswalk. There's something about the color in the environment and the way that our environment feels that increases our sense of trust in the people around us.
Well, what do you say about people who say, I have trouble finding joy in ordinary things?
I think actually what's really going on is that joy is being unlearned. So I think we're all born joyful. If you look at kids, they find wonder in the most ordinary things. And yet as we get older, I think what happens is that being colorful, being exuberant, displaying joy in a lot of the ways that children do, being silly, for example, those things expose us to judgment and they put us at risk for being called unserious or being dismissed as superficial or frivolous or self-indulgent. And so what happens is we stop doing those things. So when you talk about someone who's saying, I don't find much joy in everyday things, often what's happened is that they've unlearned that
really
they've learned to stop paying attention to that natural impulse toward joy that we're all born with. And so really it's about reconnecting with that. So my advice is, one of the things that I often tell people is to start to think about things you really enjoyed doing as a child, places you enjoyed being, things you enjoyed being in contact with. Did you love being out in nature? Were you fascinated by, your mom's cosmetics? There are all sorts of things, the colors of that. Did you light up when you went into an art store? Did you love being in motion? All of these things can be clues to things you might find joyful now. It's not that you necessarily, if you love climbing trees, should go out and climb a tree, but maybe there's something similar. Maybe it's rock climbing, or maybe it's just going and taking a hike, or maybe it's going up to the top of a tall tower in your city.
It's like joy is like gasoline you put in the tank that allows the car to move.
I think so.
And so joy allows our lives to move in new and different ways and for longer times. So let's assume you're a consultant to a friend of mine whose father is dying, whose business is in trouble, who's in essence confined and not comfortable. He says, I'm not feeling well. So how do I make him feel joyful? Or how does he make himself feel joyful?
Right. And I think sometimes making yourself feel joyful sounds difficult. But I had a conversation with someone recently that sort of pointed toward the value of starting to break apart happiness and joy. He said to me that this is someone after a talk I gave, and he said that he was recently diagnosed with a serious illness. And he said, I'm not happy, but the support he's felt from other people, the connections he's felt with his family and friends, the savoring of the simple pleasures that he's noticed since his diagnosis has made him feel joyful. He said, I'm not happy, but I am joyful.
How does he notice things?
So one thing that I love to encourage people to do is called joy spotting. It's a really simple practice. It's kind of like a mindfulness practice. And all it involves, you can do it on your commute. You can do it while walking the dog. If you have one spare minute, you can try this. And it's really just looking around you and tuning your attention to something that's joyful in your surroundings. And I think a lot of us, in the day-to-day, we spend a lot of time on our phones. We spend a lot of time looking down. We're not looking around. We're not looking for the joy in the world around us. But this, I think, can be a way to start to tune your attention to that.
And have you ever had a rough patch where you reached down and filled your tank with joy and moved forward?
I have. Yeah, I've had, many. But I think one that stands out to me was a period of time that really felt like a period of stagnation to me. I was, I think, 32, and everyone was getting married around me. I was single, going on really bad blind dates, and I was overworking myself at work. I was hitting a burnout point at work, and I ended up taking a trip to Ireland, just a quick trip. It was a work trip that I was supposed to go on that got canceled, and I had done all the planning for this trip. So I decided that even though my work trip wasn't going to happen, I decided to go anyway. I looked at my frequent flyer miles and I hopped over. And something happened while I was over there. I think it was all the green. It was springtime, and it was all the green around me. And slowing down and just being in this incredibly this landscape of renewal. It reminded me that joy moves in waves. Our emotions move in waves. We're not going to be happy all the time. We are going to go through rough patches. And the thing to remember is that joy comes back. It comes back in ways that we can't predict, ways that probably are not the way that we were planning or the way that we necessarily wanted. But watching this rebirth of the landscape, watching the growth, I think it helped remind me that my life was dynamic too. Even if in that moment it didn't feel like it, even if I felt like I was in a period of stuckness, that I had to allow that to happen. And I do think what's really important to remember is that we experience our joy in proportion to our ability to feel sorrow. When we cut ourselves off from sorrow because we don't want to feel it, when we numb ourselves through various means, either refusing to pay attention to the feeling or using substances to numb that part of ourselves, we also blunt our capacity to feel joy. And so recognizing that these two things are part and parcel of each other, and that we have to allow ourselves to feel the low sometimes, to know that we'll be able to feel the high when it comes. I think that is how I have dealt with those lows.
And that there's a richness of experience when you're down.
There is. There's a lot of contemplation that can happen in that space that can prepare you for joy.
Ingrid, thank you so much for being here and sharing some joy with us. In the beginning of our conversation, I asked us all to pause and think of what makes us joyful, and I hope it worked. But if it didn't, and you could use some assistance, let me urge everyone to check out the book. It's called Joyful, The Surprising Power of Ordinary Things to Create Extraordinary Happiness. Find out more, visit us on Facebook. Our show page is American Voices with Senator Bill Bradley. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
All this beauty, you might have to close your eyes and slowly.
Thank you for listening to American Voices here on my YouTube channel. For more interviews celebrating the goodness and creativity of the American people, click the subscribe button below.